yes, look for birds when you're looking for places where those shad are spawning. That is your biggest indicator. I don't care if there's wind. I don't care if it's calm. I don't care if the water's muddy. I don't care if the water's clear. I look for birds. That's the biggest thing I look for. The more birds there are, the more likely I am to fish. Hey everybody, welcome back to the technique of the month, and we have moved along into May. This can be a fun time of the year, and I've enjoyed doing this series kind of like we are going through the rod and reels as well with the techniques, and also kind of combining the picking 4 baits, picking 2 baits, whatever fits for the month, but really trying to dig hard into the technique and exactly what that looks like, how to fish the baits, and really trying to show you the kind of places, tell you the kind of places where this is going to apply on any body of water. When I was thinking about this for May, I looked back and I looked at the videos that we've done on the technique of the month, and I really covered shad spawn and one of those first ones. That goes on so much in May. And it can be a great way to catch them. And then the other one I talked about, like post-spawn weirdos and fishing a jerkbait and fishing a Carolina rig in May. And that certainly can be things that definitely work. And, but I really got to thinking about it. I'm like, a lot of the tournaments that I've done well in the month of May, what did my day truly look like? And that was where I came up with the idea of today's video, is really kind of my two-pronged approach to what I'll end up doing a lot of times in May, and that's fish a shad spawn in the morning, and then fishing some of those last bass that are spawning up in the day. And that's been a really good recipe for me in multiple different events. The best one, honestly, it was in the month of April, but we were down in Texas, and that was with a heavy hitters event. That's exactly what I was doing down there in a lot of that tournament. The shad spawn deal only worked for me the first couple of days. After that, for some reason, I think we got kind of away from the moon or something. Something happened, and my shad spawn bite definitely died as I got into the tournament, and it was really just all about catching those spawning fish. But that was a particular event where I did this a lot. Like the first year of the Bass Pro Tour out at Table Rock, I was doing this. I'd fish the shad spawn in the morning, fish the bass spawn in the afternoon. Multiple events over the course of my career where I've had some good tournaments in late April, maybe May, doing this kind of two-prong approach. So exactly what does it look like in kind of those patterns, is really meshing those two together. For the one bait to pick out, especially around that, thinking about the shad spawn, is a white swim jig. That's a Terminator Pros jig, 3/8 ounce, and I'll fish, or this is not the Pros jig, I'm sorry, this is the Terminator heavy duty swim jig, and I'll fish the Terminator Pros jig as well during this time of the year. And I usually use that Pros jig when I'm wanting a little bit smaller profile, and I like a 1/2 ounce in it. It skips really well. I'll fish that 3/8 ounce heavy duty swim jig as well. But the trailer I use on the back of those is the same all the time. That's that Bass Pro Swimming Elite trailer. That's the white pearl color. I like the fact, unlike other times of the year with a swim jig, I like the fact that this trailer does not have a lot of resistance for fishing on this style swim jig, post spawn, and those fish feeding up on shad, because it makes that bait, makes it move quicker. It allows it to move quicker. It doesn't have that kind of resistance that big flappy legs do, and that doesn't move as much water. It's a little bit more natural and a little bit more fluid kind of movement. That's what I like about that Swimming Elite chunk on that swim jig this time of the year. And again, a big part of that has to do with the speed I'm able to fish it, because it doesn't have those big appendages that catch a lot of water. But the places where you're going to fish that swim jig, on that shad spawn, a lot of stuff that I've talked about a lot with it. Boat docks are a big key, especially floating boat docks that have those black floats or styrofoam floats or anything like that. Those shad will get up there, and you're looking for evidence. That's the nice thing with that shad spawn technique, regardless of what they're spawning around. A lot of times you can get visual clues from above the water and know if you need to go to this point or that point, because one, you're looking for the evidence, the presence of bait fish. And the best way to see that is for those herons to be standing on the bank. If that's blue herons, if that's white herons, any type of bait fish eating birds, that is what you want to be looking for. Because when you're riding down the lake, it's not often that while you're on plain riding, you're literally going to see those shad flipping around or even see the fish busting on them. But what you will see are those birds standing around perched up, maybe out in some grass on a point, standing on a boat dock, anything like that. That is your key indicators. Look for those birds. That's the single biggest tip I can tell you when you're trying to find places where those shad are spawning. The Bass Pro Tour event that I won down at the Harris Chain, that was how I found those fish. First day of the tournament, did terrible. Fished over in Lake Griffin. Second day of the event, I was like, man, I'm going to do something totally different. Started in Harris. I had caught some in there in practice, and I literally just go riding through on our 30-minute ride around. And this one boat dock had like 10 birds standing on that one dock. You know what I did on that dock? I caught like 40 pounds out from under that one dock. All up and down that bank, there were birds. There were some scattered out, but that one dock had 10 birds on it. That's why I started there, and I caught a pile of fish off of that particular dock. Yes, look for birds when you're looking for places where those shad are spawning. That is your biggest indicator. I don't care if there's wind. I don't care if it's calm. I don't care if the water's muddy. I don't care if the water's clear. I look for birds. That's the biggest thing I look for. The more birds there are, the more likely I am to fish. And that's the nice thing with that swim jig. It works in clear water. It works in dirty water. It works if you're over 40 foot of water. It works in 4 inches of water. It is a very, very versatile bait, and why it is my single most favorite bait for fishing during the shad spawn is that white swim jig. So the thing with focusing on those places that are more main lake oriented, and what I mean by that is, like those early spawners to me, the upper end of the lake, the backs of the bigger creeks, those are all the places that warm up first. And, we'll talk about in February or March and go into those areas that have the warmest water on the lake. Well, those were the first fish that started spawning. Those fish might have spawned 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that. But once you've got to this part of the year where there are some shad spawning in a lot of the lake, I feel like those earliest places where bass spawn are probably done. Those may be fish that you're catching on a shad spawn. You may be running to the back of one of those bigger creeks, and that's where you're targeting fish with the shad spawn. Well, if you'll back up, if you'll go more, maybe down the lake more, or just those shorter, more main lake pockets, there's going to be fish that didn't migrate, into the backs of those major creeks and those type of things. Those fish are going to be the ones that spawn later and be those late spawners that you're looking for now. So those are the places where you can really make that two-prong pattern work. Go back into those creeks and fish post-spawn fish that are feeding up on shad, come back out towards the main lake or the lower end and that type of thing, and you're able to catch those fish that are still spawning. Again, I'll go back and reference that heavy hitters win down at Lake Palestine in Texas. That's what I was doing. I was fishing, back in some of those creeks and pockets and stuff. And even the guys that were on the north end of the lake, a lot of those guys were catching a lot of fish around the shad spawn. They were catching on cypress trees and different things. And they would catch more fish early in the morning sometimes than I would. But then later in the day, fishing those fish that were, spawning fish, that's where I was really kind of making it work, because I was on the south end of the lake where the lake is deeper, warms up slower, and those fish were just in little small cuts, little small canals and stuff in that particular scenario, just off of the main lake. So, really trying to understand that fish in different parts of the lakes are in different phases, and you can kind of find fish that are ahead of other parts and target that at one point in time, and then sometimes kind of back up and try to find fish that are a little bit further behind that may pay for you a little bit later in the day. And that's one, again, that has been really, really good to me over the years in a lot of different tournament situations. And I think it's because I don't mind to switch from one pattern completely and completely shift gears and really look at doing something different. For those fish that are spawning, if I had to pick just one particular bait to use on those, I don't have the sinker on there, but it would be a Texas rig. That's that Bass Pro Magnum Finneck worm, a worm I have caught so many bass on. I really wish I would have started using this thing 10 years ago, because I have caught so many bass on this thing in the last, I've used it a lot, probably for 5 or 6 years, 4 or 5 years at this point. But man, I've caught a ton of bass on that thing. Key with it in this situation, as well as most of the time, is a 3/16 ounce weight. that really lets that bait do what it needs to do on the fall. It's not so heavy that it kills the action. It's not too light to where it doesn't give it the action. 3/16 is the weight for that thing. And then that's a 4/0 VMC. That's the red line hybrid wide gap hook on there. That works really well. The hybrid worm hook works really well in a 4/0, and this thing rigs up pretty good on either one of them. But that thing is just dynamite. One of my favorite bed fishing baits. One of my favorite baits just to pitch around at any point in time. But that worm just absolutely gets bit on a Texas rig. The setup that I fished that on, this is another one of those signature series that I started using this year and really fell in love with. And I have fished that for a number of years on a platinum rod and reel. But the reason that I think I really liked it on that signature series this year, and why I'm going to continue using on that going forward, is that signature series has slightly bigger guides than that platinum rod does. I like the small guides on that platinum rod for a lot of situations, but for this technique, like I do so many techniques anymore, I use braided line on my bait caster with the fluorocarbon leader. With that FG knot joining those, it is a small knot, but if you've got guides that are almost micro guides, it does make it a little bit harder to cast or to pitch that knot through your guides. So having just slightly larger guides like you have on that signature series rod really work well with that braid with the fluorocarbon leader. So that's one reason I really like this rod. 7.2 medium heavy action is what I was using on that, and used a carbon light reel on that for the most part. 8:3 to 1 gear ratio. And again, that's 40-pound braid is what I've got on there. And then I've typically got that on a 17-pound XPS fluorocarbon leader, 3/16. I use a bobber stop, VMC bobber stop to peg that weight down there. But again, dynamite setup. The platinum works well for it. I mean, it fishes it really good. But those slightly bigger guides, just with that FG knot, definitely work well for that swim jig, for that Terminator swim jig. I do continue to throw that on a platinum rod, and the reason for that is swimming that jig, unless I'm in grass, if I'm skipping it under boat docks, if I'm just swimming it down the bank or really thin grass or something, I fish it on straight fluorocarbon, 20-pound test XPS fluorocarbon, and then that platinum setup is what I like for it really well. It's a 7.1 medium heavy platinum reel, 8:3 to 1 gear ratio. You could these, in my opinion, action wise, absolutely interchangeable. You could fish that swim jig on this signature series rod. I did some last year. Works totally fine. It's just absolutely interchangeable as far as that goes. You've got an inch difference in the length, a little bit different guides. The actions are nearly identical. So I've got these laid out here on two different ones, but they, again, basically the exact same setup. Just the biggest difference is that I do like that swim jig. I do like it again, if I'm not in grass, I like it on straight fluorocarbon just because the way I pump that bait and fish it back. That's one thing I'll touch on a little bit. The Texas rig, sight fishing, I've done videos on that and kind of how I read fish and how I aggravate them and that kind of stuff. We did a really good in-depth one with underwater, of those fish on the bed. If you've not seen that one, go back and check it out. And I've talked a lot about how I fish that swim jig in some different videos, but I'll go over that real quick again. So if I'm fishing boat docks, I'm going to try to skip it, as far back under that dock as possible. But fishing a swim jig like that, for me, it's not a cast it out and reel it in deal like it is if I'm in grass. It's a pumping that bait with your rod tip, kind of pump it and turn the handle, pump it and turn the handle, kind of offsetting that deal, because I want that thing doing this number in the water column, okay? I don't want it just, coming along, kind of shaking. I don't do the real aggressive shake deal. I pump that swim jig because I want it, again, kind of doing that type of swim throughout the water column. It's just what's been really effective for me, and somebody much smarter than me taught me to do that, and that's Andy Montgomery. So he taught me how to catch fish on a swim jig like that around docks. So that's just what I do. But no, try that kind of two-pronged technique this time of the year. I think it's something that you'll find you're able to get bites all day long by doing that. That shad spawn deal can be just absolute fire and can be so good, but it lasts about an hour, maybe two. Some situations I've seen it last, till 10 or 11 o'clock, and that's a really big exception to that rule. But it can be so good it just does not last all day long. When that dies, there's probably somewhere on that body of water there's still some fish spawning. So if you can back up and find those, that can kind of supplement the rest of your day, or maybe even really capitalize on the rest of your day to find a couple big ones that are still up there on the bed late. So definitely check that out. I think it's a great way to catch them and a way to do very well in tournaments this month.